Strike on Duty. Episode 1, The Smokehouse Confession. The sirens hadn't even died down when Detective Grazer Strike stepped out of his black sedan onto the cracked pavement of Hollow Bend Street, the frigid air saturated with smoke, scorched timber, and something eerily sweet, like molasses set on fire. The Smokehouse Grill, a long-standing dive popular among truckers and weary blue-collar locals, was now a mangled ruin of beams and blackened brick, smoke curling into the night sky like a final breath. An hour ago, it had been alive with laughter, beer, and the hiss of a deep fryer. Now it stood silent, gutted. A waitress sat near the flashing lights of the fire engine, wrapped in a foil blanket, her mascara streaked and cheeks flushed red from cold and tears. "I just stepped out to smoke," Leanne sobbed, and then, boom. I turned around and the back kitchen was glowing. I didn't see anyone. No one strange. Detective Strike knelt beside her, his long coat brushing the icy pavement. He studied her, not just her words, but her tone, her trembling hands, the sharp panic in her eyes. She wasn't lying. She'd seen something she wasn't ready to understand. Officer Delwyn, his young and eager partner in training, scribbled in his notepad with messy urgency. She might have seen the fire just as it started, Delwyn murmured, stepping aside with Strike. "You thinking grease fire?" Strike didn't answer. His eyes wandered. Across the street, a small group of late-night onlookers stood under the glow of a liquor store sign. One man stood apart, mid-40s, sharply dressed, unmoving. No phone. No expression. Just watching. Almost admiring. Before Strike could step toward him, a fire marshal waved them over. "Accelerant present," the marshal said grimly. "We found gas residue near the old kitchen backup line. The one that runs under the prep station. Whoever did this knew where to hit it." Strike narrowed his eyes. "That line wasn't listed on the current renovation plans, was it?" "Nope," the marshal replied. "And get this, it was supposed to be sealed off last year." Strike exhaled slowly. Someone knew exactly where that line was and how to rupture it. 48 hours later, Precinct HQ, arson case board. By the second day, Strike had a name pinned to the top of the board, Duncan Marlowe. Former owner of the Smokehouse Grill. A man with a knack for vanishing just before things turned sour. "He sold the business 3 years ago," Delwyn reported, slapping down a thin folder. "But he still owns the building. Renewed the insurance policy 2 months ago, and upped the coverage." Strike flipped through the documents. How much of a jump? From $300,000 to $850,000. Filed the increase after a minor kitchen accident that, according to fire inspection reports, never happened. Of course it didn't. Delwyn shook his head. And get this, he left the city last week. Booked a 4-day trip to Milton Grove, supposedly to see his brother. Grazer leaned back in his chair. Just far enough not to look suspicious. Just close enough to come back fast if he needs to tie up loose ends. Delwyn frowned. "Think he's hiding?" "No," Strike said. "I think he's waiting." Strike spent the next day combing through Duncan's records, court filings, and small business archives. The deeper he dug, the dirtier it got. 2 years ago, Duncan was quietly fined for manipulating kitchen health inspection results in one of his other restaurants, never prosecuted, but the record was buried in city code violations. 4 years ago, he was investigated for skimming employee wages. Settled out of court. "He's a ghost," Strike muttered. "Slippery, invisible, just barely legal." "He's never served time," Delwyn added. "Always skirts the law." "You think this fire was his way out?" "Maybe. Or a cash grab before whatever debt he's hiding swallows him whole." Strike pulled up Duncan's travel itinerary. Milton Grove. Left a week ago before the fire. Arrived at his brother's house according to timestamped texts, but the problem was, the fire started 6 hours before Duncan was scheduled to return. "Perfect alibi," Delwyn said. "A little too perfect." "Exactly." Strike circled the timestamp. He planned this for weeks. Planted the device or triggered the gas line before he left, knowing Leanne would cover the time gap just by stepping out for a cigarette. And if she hadn't? She was always going to. Routine. Predictable. "That's the thing about criminals who think they're smarter than everyone else," Strike said, grabbing his coat. "They rely on certainty. But they forget that habits leave trails. Later that night, stakeout in West Briar. By 9 p.m., Strike and Delwyn sat parked outside a modest townhouse in West Briar, the known residence of Duncan's brother. The house was quiet. No lights on except in the basement window. Delwyn checked the clock. Think he's back. Waiting for us to move. He'll want to know if the fire marshal found anything. And when he finds out. Strike smirked slightly. He'll run. That's when we follow. Delwyn leaned forward. You really think he did it? I think Duncan Marlowe got tired of pretending to be a businessman. I think he's broke, bitter, and bold. And I think he watched his own building burn from a safe distance with a smirk on his face. Suddenly, a car door opened across the street. Delwyn reached for his radio. That's him. Strike stepped out calmly, fixing his coat. No sirens, he said. No rush. Let him believe it's still his game. He glanced at Duncan's silhouette slipping into the driver's seat. Because tomorrow, he said, we pull the rug and watch him fall hard. The interrogation room wasn't nearly as dramatic as the movies made it out to be. No flickering bulb, no swinging desk lamp. Just grey walls, cold steel chairs, and the kind of silence that made men sweat in their own skin. Duncan Marlowe sat at the table, arms crossed, wearing a casual wool coat and a look of smug exhaustion. A faint cologne scent clung to him, citrus and expensive. His expression was unreadable, but Strike had seen enough liars to recognize a man rehearsing. Across from him, Detective Grazer Strike leaned back with his coffee, unreadable as always. Delwyn, pen in hand, stood near the corner of the room, watching, absorbing, learning. Strike opened the file slowly, flipping pages not because he needed to, but because silence always made people nervous. So, Strike began, voice low, casual, you took a trip out to Milton Grove. Left the morning before the fire. Must have needed a break. Duncan chuckled. I work hard. I earned it. Of course. Smart to relax every now and then, especially when you've got a building set to explode while you're out of town. Duncan's smile barely moved. Is that a joke? No, Strike replied. That was me being polite. Duncan glanced toward the door. I'm not sure why I'm even here. I sold the Smokehouse grill years ago. I don't run it anymore. Strike tilted his head. You sold the business, sure. But not the building. Deed still has your name. Taxes too. Duncan shrugged. Maybe I forgot to update it. No. You forgot to cover your tracks. Delwyn handed over a document. Strike placed it gently in front of Duncan. 2 months ago, you renewed the fire insurance policy. Tripled the coverage. The claim was filed under your name. Odd for someone who's supposedly hands-off, don't you think? I have assets. I protect them. That's not illegal. No, it's not, Strike admitted, voice flat. But torching your own property to cash in on it is. A long pause followed. Duncan finally leaned forward, the first signs of tension tightening the corners of his jaw. Am I under arrest? Not yet, Strike said coolly. Then I want a lawyer before I say anything else. Delwyn blinked but said nothing. Strike didn't flinch. He only nodded. Sure. That's your right. But let me make something clear, you're not here because we're guessing. You're here because we're watching. Duncan laughed softly, trying to shake off the pressure. Is this how you treat everyone? Accuse them with zero evidence. Strike stood slowly, walking around the table, not looming, just moving, calculated, composed. Funny thing about evidence, he said, it doesn't always knock first. Sometimes it waits until you start getting comfortable. He stopped behind Duncan. Like when you try to file your insurance payout. Or when the fire inspector's report comes back with traces of ammonium nitrate under the tile. Or when we pull CCTV footage from the alley behind the smokehouse and catch someone sneaking in the night before your trip. Duncan didn't move. Didn't blink. But his silence was telling. Strike walked back around the table and sat down, folding his hands. Tell me, he said with faux curiosity, why did you stop using gloves? You were always so cautious before, health inspections, wage theft, tax inconsistencies. You skirted it all so clean. But this? He tapped the file. This was messy. Desperate. Rushed. Duncan finally spoke, voice low and clipped. You have nothing. Just theories and assumptions. Not for long, Strike said, standing up. We already requested the insurance payout schedule from Halberton and Keyes. Let's see when you try to collect. That'll tell us everything. Delwyn followed Strike as they left the room, but not before Grazer leaned back in the doorway and added. Oh, and don't plan any more trips. You won't be going far until this is resolved. Outside the interrogation room, Delwyn let out a low whistle. That guy's good. He didn't flinch once. Strike was already moving down the hall. He's been lying for a long time. The good ones get used to it. You really think he'll try to collect the insurance money so soon? Oh, he has to, Strike replied. He needs it. His other businesses are floundering. He's knee-deep in debt creditors, back taxes, maybe even some quiet private loans. That policy is his lifeline. Delwyn hesitated. Should we have arrested him anyway? Strike shook his head. No. Not yet. We give him rope. Let him walk out thinking he won. He'll slip. He has to. The next day, Grazer's office. A large corkboard dominated the back wall. Names. Arrows. Photos. Dates. Red string lines traced everything from past inspection fines to Duncan's recent cash withdrawals. On the desk, a voicemail blinked. Strike played it on speaker. This is Jennifer from Halberton and Keyes Insurance. You requested access to Duncan Marlowe's policy records. He hasn't filed for payout yet, but he's called twice in the last 3 days to ask about how long the process takes. Grazer and Delwyn exchanged a look. He's circling the payout, Strike said. He's just waiting for the fire report to go cold. Or for us to look away. Which we won't. Strike grabbed his coat again. We follow the money. We follow the schedule. The second he moves, we're ready. Delwyn tapped the whiteboard where the timeline was drawn. What if he gets nervous and tries to flee? He won't, Strike replied. Men like Duncan don't run until the gates are already locked. Right now, he thinks we blinked. Let him enjoy that. He paused at the door. Because when he files that insurance claim, he added, voice like steel, he'll be signing his own arrest warrant. The city had that strange quiet that followed disaster, where people kept their heads down just a little longer, and smoke still clung to the air days after the fire had been put out. At the 12th precinct, Detective Grazer Strike sat in his office, 1 foot on the edge of his desk, a manila folder in his lap, and the faint ticking of the wall clock behind him. He wasn't in a hurry. He never was. Across the hall, Officer Delwyn clicked through surveillance footage. The sound of plastic cups crinkling and radio chatter hummed in the background. The precinct smelled faintly of burnt coffee and whiteboard marker, another slow morning in a city that never really slept, just blinked. But Strike knew better. Somewhere, Duncan Marlowe was waiting too. 2 days after the interrogation. Duncan had left the station with a stiff smile and a sharp look in his eyes. He had walked out like a man who believed he was still ahead, who believed time was on his side. And for the moment, it was. He was careful now. Patient. He hadn't filed the insurance claim just yet, not officially. But Strike's contact at Halberton and Keyes said he had called again, asking, almost casually, what the required documents were, and whether photos of the fire were needed. It was coming. Duncan had started appearing more in public again. Shopping for wine. Talking to a butcher on 4th Street. There was even word of a planned barbecue near the South End riverbank, just outside city limits, something casual, friendly, just a man blowing off steam. Strike smiled to himself. Act normal. That's what they always try first. Delwyn entered the room with a notepad and a raised brow. He invited for friends to that barbecue. 2 business buddies, 1 real estate agent, and a guy who works logistics for a construction firm in Westvale. Westvale. Strike looked up. That's where his frozen asset property is, right? Yep. The one sitting empty since the city filed a lien on it. Looks like he's trying to sweet-talk his way back into deals. Desperation wears cologne, Strike muttered. Meanwhile, across the city. But just as the Marlowe case simmered at the edge of readiness, the city had something else planned. A 911 call came in early Tuesday morning. Joggers near Stonebridge Park had stumbled across a body. Male. Early 30s. Athletic build. Lying flat on a frozen patch of dirt just beyond the riverside path, tucked behind a line of shrubs dusted with snow. Eyes open. Pale. And a single clean slit across the throat, too clean. No defensive wounds. No struggle. No blood splatter. Just stillness. At the scene, 7:21 a.m. Strike stood over the body, his coat collar pulled high as wind whispered through the trees. His eyes scanned the area methodically, no trail. No drag marks. No signs of panic. It was clinical. Controlled. Who found him? He asked. A young female officer pointed toward the patrol car. 2 runners. Mid-40s. Took this path every morning. They say he wasn't here yesterday. Delwyn crouched beside the body. No wallet, no phone. But look at the wound. Strike knelt beside him. His eyes locked onto the throat. The cut was flawless. Not torn. Not hurried. Scalpel, he said. Or something like it. Delwyn raised a brow. Medical background. Maybe. But that's not the part that bothers me. What is? Strike looked up, scanning the area. No blood. Delwyn blinked. None? None, Strike repeated. At least, not here. That means he was killed somewhere else, Delwyn whispered, finishing the thought. Then posed. Strike nodded, rising. And posed carefully. No message. No symbol. Just the cut. For a moment, he said nothing more. Then he turned to the lead officer. Bag and tag everything. Get full soil samples from beneath the body and around the surrounding plants. If there's a transport trail, it's going to be subtle. Someone went to a lot of effort to make this look effortless. Back at the station, Forensics Division. Later that afternoon, Strike reviewed the initial forensic notes with Delwyn and Dr. Lee, the city coroner. The body was fully drained, Lee said, flipping through slides on the screen. Post-mortem lividity suggests the victim was killed lying face up elsewhere, probably indoors. The clean cut to the throat was made with extreme precision. Not a jagged edge. Clean muscle separation. Like surgery. Strike asked. Exactly. Could be a surgeon. Could be a butcher. Could even be someone with crime scene experience. But whoever did it knew anatomy. Delwyn scanned the preliminary ID. Name's Noah Krellin. Works in software design. No record, no known enemies. Single. Lived alone. Apartment was clean, too clean, actually. Too clean? Strike asked. Delwyn nodded. No clutter, no laundry. Surfaces wiped. Fridge nearly empty. It's like someone prepped it to look untouched. Strike leaned back, thinking. What if the victim didn't clean it? Delwyn's face fell slightly. You think the killer did? Possibly. Or he never made it home at all. As night fell, Strike's office lights burned on. The Marlowe case remained in the corner, slowly piecing itself together. But this, Noah Krellin's murder, had a different temperature. Cold. Exact. And it felt too quiet. Grazer flipped between the 2 case folders. Duncan Marlowe, sloppy but manipulative, driven by money and the illusion of control. Noah Krellin, a clean murder with no apparent motive. Methodical. No fingerprints. No mistakes. 2 different beasts, he murmured. One loud. One whispering. He looked over at the caseboard again, Marlowe's picture now circled in red. Krellin's photo pinned in blue beneath it. 2 crimes. 2 puzzles. But Grazer Strike had a rule, there's no such thing as coincidence. Only poorly written timelines. And as the cold wind howled beyond the station walls, he knew both stories were about to unravel, one thread at a time. It was raining again, light, persistent drizzle that misted the windows and smeared the city lights into abstract colors. Detective Grazer Strike didn't mind. Rain made the city slower. Rain gave him time. Across town, the news about the newly found body, Noah Krellin, throat slit with surgical precision, ran in muted tones from mounted televisions in cafes, corner stores, and waiting rooms. Everyone seemed to have an opinion. Serial killer? Gang hit? Another notch in the city's growing crime list? But Duncan Marlowe only sipped his overpriced cappuccino in a cafe booth, feigning indifference. He was good at pretending. It's how he'd survived this long. Back at the precinct, Strike was peeling layers off the case like rotting wallpaper. His partner Delwyn was poring over Noah Krellin's digital trail. Noah had no enemies on record, no debts, no known affiliations. He'd worked as a freelance digital archivist, which, to Strike, translated to he knew things most people forgot. Got something, Delwyn said, pushing a tablet toward him. CCTV from a week before his death. Krellin seen talking to a man outside the city archives building. Can't see the guy's face, but he gives him a folder. Strike leaned closer. The footage was grainy, but the body language was telling. What's in the folder? Don't know yet. We requested the city cams from the next 2 blocks. It'll take time. Strike nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. Duncan Marlowe, meanwhile, had slipped into his carefully pressed button-down shirt, drunk his beer and talked lousily to his so-called friends. It was for another show. He didn't particularly like his guests. But the alibi was perfect, cameras from the nearby boat rental, witness statements, even a few pictures on social media. A man among friends. Grieving a burnt-down dream but carrying on. In the trunk of his car back at the apartment, hidden under a false compartment, sat a gym bag stuffed with new IDs, burner phones, a switchblade, and a few $1,000s in cash. He wasn't stupid enough to leave it to chance. But what Duncan didn't know was that the trap had been set long before the barbecue skewers hit the flame. 3 floors underground, beneath the glossy marble entrance of the Sovereign Suites building, Strike stood beside a concrete pillar in the basement parking area. The place stank of oil, mildew, and tension. He leaned on Duncan Marlowe's car with one hand in his pocket, holding a cigarette he didn't plan to light. He didn't need to. The smoke would come soon enough. A soft ding announced the elevator's arrival. Duncan stepped out, adjusting his coat collar, carrying a large envelope, his payout. He whistled softly, then stopped cold when he saw the silhouette leaning against his car. "You've got the wrong space," Duncan said, his voice tight. "Nope," Strike replied, flicking the cigarette aside. "Right car. Right guy. Just wrong story." Duncan chuckled nervously. "You can't touch me. I've done nothing wrong." "I know," Strike said coolly. "Yet." The detective stepped forward, voice calm, measured. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to drive out like you planned. But instead of a new life, you're heading straight into one hell of a deposition. The insurance board is already waiting for you. Because the moment you try to cash that check, which, by the way, I had flagged yesterday, you're officially committing fraud." Duncan's jaw twitched. Strike continued, "Oh, and Noah Krellin? Turns out he was digging into old archive records. Know what he found? A list of property transfers under fake LLCs linked to multiple past insurance fires. Yours included." Strike tossed a photo toward him. "Noah had your name. We think he tried to meet with someone else, someone who didn't want the past coming back to light." "You can't pin that on me," Duncan said, quieter now. "Not really," Strike agreed. "But it's getting close. So here's the deal. You can either make it easier by cooperating, or keep playing pretend while the walls keep closing in." Duncan didn't answer. His fingers tightened around the envelope. Strike stepped back. "We're not arresting you, yet. But I'll be watching. The next step you take might be your last as a free man." As Strike walked away into the fog of the garage, Duncan stood frozen. The envelope suddenly felt heavier. Every breath a countdown. Back at the precinct, Delwyn called out, "Strike! Got something on the folder Noah passed. Records of suppressed arson investigations from years back. All tied to one insurance agent. Guess who?" Strike didn't stop walking. "Duncan Marlowe?" Delwyn blinked. "You're really not human." Strike allowed a rare, faint smirk. "No. I just never stopped watching." Grazer Strike stood by the window of his cluttered office, the late afternoon sun casting slanted shadows across a desk littered with reports, files, and coffee-stained maps. He sipped lukewarm coffee as Officer Delwyn returned, face flushed, holding a folder thick with the latest forensics. "More just came in, sir," Delwyn said, setting the folder down. "It's about Marlowe." Strike turned slowly, his tired eyes sharpening with interest. He took the folder and flipped it open. Inside were high-resolution photographs and detailed documents from the crime lab. There it was, Marlowe's fingerprints on a rented storage locker that was supposedly unused for years. The contents? A series of old receipts, blueprints of the Smokehouse grill, and a rusted toolbox with a blowtorch and gas fittings, tools that didn't match the restaurant's standard inventory. But that wasn't all. The forensics team also uncovered coded text messages from Marlowe's burner phone, recovered after a hasty deletion attempt. Messages like "get the valves done before 9 p.m. and use the old line, less obvious." Strike closed the folder. "Marlowe took the insurance cash already," Delwyn said grimly. "Went to a teller instead of wiring it. Very old school. We have camera footage of the transaction too." "Of course he did," Strike said, his tone flat but calculating. "He thought going analog would keep him clean." Delwyn nodded. "What now?" Strike placed the file carefully aside. "Now we tie the bow. But we do it tight." While Marlowe basked in the illusion of freedom, the murder of Noah Krellin remained a bleeding mystery. Strike and Delwyn canvassed the area. CCTV from nearby stores caught Noah walking alone just minutes before his estimated time of death. A shadow trailed him for 2 blocks. The footage was grainy, the figure hidden under a hood. But Strike noticed the gait. Calm. Intentional. Familiar. "Still think it's unrelated?" Delwyn asked. "Not unrelated," Strike replied. "But not Marlowe either. This cut, it's not an arsonist's kill. It's too skilled. Marlowe's a coward who hides behind fire. This killer walked up to a man and ended him like a job." "Then who?" Strike didn't answer. His mind was already connecting dots that hadn't even been drawn yet. Marlowe, meanwhile, had moved as if the world owed him peace. He's very careful, doing normal things people usually do. He's trying to be a model citizen. To anyone watching, he was a man moving on. But Strike had never stopped watching. When Marlowe finally walked to his car in the dim basement parking lot of his rented condo, the world around him felt too quiet. His key was halfway into the lock when... Click! "Evening, Duncan." Marlowe froze, his hand trembling just slightly. Turning, he found Strike leaning casually against the neighboring car, arms folded, tie loose, a file in hand. "I thought you were chasing that Krellin case." "I was," Strike replied. "Still am. But your turn's up." "You got nothing," Marlowe said coolly. "No flames on my hands. No one saw me do anything. Just smoke." Strike stepped forward. "Storage locker in Red Cross. Your fingerprints, receipts, blueprints. Text messages we've decoded. And you cashed the policy today, didn't you? Every cent of it. Should have waited just one more day." Marlowe's face twisted slightly. "Still not a crime to spend what's mine." Strike opened the folder. "Actually, it is. Because your name was never removed from the restaurant license after the sale. Paperwork shows it was a lease. You never truly sold it. And that makes your insurance claim fraudulent. Add that to the fact that the tools in that locker link directly to how the fire was started." Strike stepped even closer, voice low but cutting. "And the cherry? You're in possession of unregistered tools and chemicals banned in residential zones. Congratulations. Fraud. False claim. Illegal possession. Misconduct. You've been busy." 2 officers emerged from the shadows, weapons ready. Marlowe looked around, suddenly stripped of his practiced calm. "You think this is over?" he hissed as they cuffed him. "Oh, Duncan," Strike said as he turned away, "this is just your chapter ending. There's a bigger book ahead. And I plan to read it cover to cover. Read him his rights." Back at the station. Strike sat back in his chair, the city's hum outside barely a whisper through the walls. He flipped open a new folder marked Krellin. A scribbled note stuck to the front read, "Possible connection to red ash cases?" He smiled faintly. There were more fires to put out, and some, he knew, were yet to be lit.